Chapter 2 of Mental Fascination. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 2. Mental Fascination Among the Animals. Even before the human race was evolved, mental fascination was known instinctively to the lower forms of life. It is said that the cells in the blood of living things become aware of the presence of each other, at distances which must preclude any theory of ordinary sense awareness. Not only do they recognize or sense the presence of each other, but they seem to be attracted toward each other by some force, or fascination, which must operate along the lines of desire and will. Eminent scientists inform us that even the atoms manifest an attraction for each other, varying in degree according to the nature of the respective atoms. And the same authorities tell us that this attracting operates along the lines of a desire for each other, and a will, which causes them to fly to each other. Is it not reasonable to suppose that in this instinctive manifestation of attraction, and the response to attraction among the atoms, there is to be found the elemental principle of mental fascination? And are not the phenomena of electrical attraction and magnetic attraction related to the human phenomena by a long series of links in a grand chain? The two phases. But leaving the above questions without further consideration, we may find an abundance of proof among the higher forms of the lower animals. Among the animals we find many instances of the power of charming or fascinating, both of which I hold to be but varying forms of manifestation of mental fascination, as I use the term, i.e., the action of a mental force that powerfully influences the imagination, desire, or will of another. This mental fascination among the animals manifests along two lines, viz. 1. Along the lines of desire operating in the direction of sex manifestation, such as the winning of mates, etc., and 2. Along the lines of will operation in the direction of overcoming the prey of the animal, such as the charming of birds by serpents, or of the smaller animals by tigers, etc. These cases are capable of liberal illustration and proof, and natural history affords us full authority for accepting the same. Instances of animal fascination. I recently read an account of a naturalist who related that one day in a tropical country he noticed a winged insect circling around and around a scorpion. After a bit, the insect made a series of desperate plunges at the scorpion, as if in a frantic desire to terminate the charm, the scorpion soon striking down the insect and afterwards devouring it. It is related by travelers that when one comes suddenly in the presence of a lion, tiger, or leopard, his legs seem paralyzed, and the eyes of the beast seem to exert a peculiar fascination and power over him. I have seen a mouse manifest the same emotion in the presence of a cat, and the same is true of a rat in the presence of a ferret or similar enemy. On the other hand, every observer has noticed the wonderful charming power that animals exert over others of their kind, of the opposite sex. If you have ever witnessed the courting of a bird during the mating season, you will have a keen sense of the reality of the power employed. One of the birds, and it may be either the male or female, will be seen to actually fascinate or charm the one of the opposite sex, the latter lying still with quivering wings and a helpless expression in its eyes. When compared with the attitude of the same bird when charmed by a serpent, the resemblance will be striking. Scientific testimony. I have before me a book written in 1847, which relates quite a number of instances in the operation of mental fascination among the lower animals. I will give you a few of them, condensed and abbreviated. Professor Silliman is quoted as stating that one day, while crossing the Hudson River at Catskill, he passed along a narrow road with the river on one side and a steep bank covered by bushes on the other side. His attention was attracted by the sight of a number of birds of a variety of species who were flying forward and backwards across the road, turning and wheeling in strange gyrations and with noisy chirpings, seemingly centering over a particular point of the road. Upon examination the professor found an enormous black snake, partly coiled and partly erect, showing an appearance of great animation, with his eyes flashing like a brilliant diamond, and his tongue darting in and out. The snake was the center of the motion of the birds. The professor adds that although the snake disappeared in the bushes, frightened at the approach of the men, still the birds seemed too dazed to escape, and perched on the nearby bushes, evidently awaiting the reappearance of their charmer. The charming by snakes. The same book relates an incident of a man in Pennsylvania who saw a large black snake charming a bird. The bird described gradually decreasing circles around the snake, at the same time uttering piteous cries. It seemed almost ready to drop into the jaws of the snake, when the man drove off the latter, when the bird arose with a song of joy. Another case is related of a ground squirrel, which was observed running to and fro between a creek and a large tree a few yards distant. The squirrel's fur was badly ruffled, and he exhibited fright and distress. Investigation disclosed the head and neck of a rattlesnake protruding from the hole of the tree and pointing directly at the squirrel. The poor squirrel at last gave up the fight, and yielding to the fascination, laid himself down with his head very close to the snake's mouth. The snake then proceeded to swallow the squirrel, when his meal was interrupted with a cut of a carriage whip in the hands of the observer, and the squirrel, released from the spell, ran briskly away. Interesting instances. Dr. Good is quoted as having made quite a study of the curious fascinating power that rattlesnakes manifest over small animals, such as birds, squirrels, and young hares, etc. He relates that these animals seem incapable of drawing their eyes away from those of the snake, and, although seemingly struggling to get away, they still gradually approach the snake, as though urged toward him, or attracted by a power superior to their natural instincts. He goes on to state that the animals creep nearer and nearer, until at last it is drawn into the serpent's mouth, which has been open all the while to receive them. Dr. Barrow is quoted as relating many instances of this kind known to peasants in all parts of the world. Valiant, the African traveler, tells of an instance in which he witnessed a shrike at the very act of being fascinated by a large snake at a distance, the fiery eyes and open mouth of which was gradually approaching the bird, the latter manifesting convulsive trembling and uttering piercing shrieks of distress. The traveler shot the snake, but upon picking up the bird he found it dead, killed either by fear, or the power of the serpent, or perhaps by the violent breaking of the spell. He measured the distance between the snake and the bird, and found it to be 3½ feet. Strange stories. A case is related in one of the early reports of the Philosophical Society, in which a mouse was put in a cage with a viper by way of an experiment. The mouse at first seemed greatly agitated, which state was followed by a condition of fascination, the mouse drawing nearer and nearer to the viper, which remained motionless, with distended jaws and glistening eyes. The mouse finally actually entered the jaws of the viper and was devoured. Bruce, the African traveler, relates that the natives of an interior tribe seem to be protected by nature against the bite of scorpions and vipers. They are said to handle these creatures fearlessly, the latter seeming to be robbed of their power of resistance. He states that the creatures seem to sicken the moment they are touched by the natives, and are sometimes so exhausted by the invisible fascinating power that they perish shortly. He says, "I have constantly observed that however lively the viper was before, upon being seized by any of these barbarians, he seemed as if taken with sickness and feebleness, and frequently would shut his eyes, and would never turn his mouth toward the arm that held him." Snake charmer. Personally, I have seen a somewhat similar case. When I was a boy in Maryland, I knew of a farm hand who was called a snake charmer. How he did it I could never find out, but he would exert some kind of influence over all kinds of snakes, poisonous ones included, and would cause them to remain fascinated until with a quick movement he would grab them by the neck with his bare hands. This man generally carried a few pet snakes around with him for company. They seemed perfectly contented, and would poke their heads up out of his pocket in order to look at someone else with whom he might be talking. The negroes on the farm had a mortal terror of this man, and would walk a couple of miles rather than pass by his house. Fascinating fierce animals. The power of charming animals, dogs, and wild beasts, is undoubtedly possessed by some men in varying degrees, and nearly everyone has known of men who could charm the wildest horses as if by magic. I have read of some burglars who seemed able to quiet the most ferocious watchdogs. The Swedish writer Lindekrantz tells of certain natives of Lapland who are possessed of some process of charming dogs to such an extent that they have been known to cow the most savage greyhound, causing him to fly from them with all the signs of abject fear. Many of my readers have seen or heard of the horse whisperers, found in various parts of the country, who will shut themselves in a stable with a fierce horse, and by whispering to him will manage to tame him completely and make him passive to their will. Charmed by a snake. There are cases recorded in which men, who have been charmed by a snake, have afterwards given in their experience. One of these cases relates that a man was walking in his garden when he suddenly came into the presence of a snake, whose eyes gleamed in a peculiar manner. He found himself fascinated as if by a spell, and unable to withdraw his eyes from those of the creature. The snake, he stated afterward, seemed to begin to increase immensely in size, and assumed in rapid succession a mixture of brilliant colours. He grew dizzy, and would have fallen in the direction of the snake, had not his wife approached, throwing her arms about him and breaking the spell. Another similar case is related in which a man found his companion standing still on the road, with his eyes fixed intently upon those of a large rattlesnake, which was regarding him fixedly with gleaming eyes, scintillating in its raised head. The man was leaning toward the snake, and would have fallen toward it in a few moments. He was crying feebly but piteously, "He will bite me! He will kill me!" "Sure he will," replied his friend. "Why don't you run away? Why are you staying here?" But the man seemed perfectly dazed and distracted, and could not answer. The companion finally picked up a stick and struck at the snake, which glided away savagely. The fascinated man was sick for several hours afterward. A personal experience. When I was a boy I had somewhat similar experience, although not nearly so serious. Walking one day among a grove of trees belonging to my grandfather, I found myself standing, staring intently at a snake about 2 feet long, whose eyes glistened like large diamonds. In a moment I ceased to see anything but those awful eyes, which glistened and displayed all the prismatic colours to my frightened glance. It lasted but a moment, however, for the snake glided away, seemingly as anxious to get away from me as I was to part company with him. I cannot say whether the spell would have been broken by me if the snake had not moved away. Perhaps it might, or perhaps not. All that I remember now, after the passage of 35 years or more, is that I did not seem to feel fear after the first shock, my feeling and emotion seemingly being that of great wonder and amazement arising from what I saw in those eyes. An elemental force. But I have said enough regarding the manifestation of mental fascination among the lower animals. There are many interesting instances of this sort scattered through the pages of books on animal life, and nearly everyone who has lived in the woods or among wild life knows of many cases illustrating this fact, which have come under his own observation. I have mentioned these features of the subject merely for the purpose of showing you that we have to deal with a general natural principle which manifests throughout all life. This book has to deal with the manifestation of this force among men, but in closing this chapter, I would ask you to notice the resemblance between the manifestation of the force among the animals on the one hand, and among mankind on the other. The animals employ the force for 2 purposes, i.e., the captivating of mates and the capture of prey. And how do men and women use it? Among similar lines. Yes, I mean this, as startling as it may appear. For is not the use of fascination in the direction of attracting the opposite sex akin to the sex charming noticed among the birds and animals? And is not the use of fascination in the direction of influencing men and women along the lines of business or personal interest akin to the charming of prey by wild animals, serpents, etc.? You may see that evolution simply changes the form of use in this and other natural qualities and power, the force or power remaining the same under all of the changes. And does it not become important for us to understand, study, and guard ourselves against the employment of such an elemental force as this, which manifests along all planes of life, from lowest to highest? I emphatically answer yes. End of chapter 2.